Okay.
You want to introduce him?
Sure, I'd love to.
Okay.
Today we're going to interview Saunders' dad, Kenyon Clark.
Yeah.
From Color Country, born and raised Color Country. Tell us what town you're from.
Actually from Parowan, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
Best place in the world to grow up because we could do about anything we wanted without a whole lot of supervision. We got to do just about anything we wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask, typically wouldn't say your age, but I have to say that you were born in 1942 because I just thinking about, Bo's 8 and what it would be like. I mean, you basically grew up in the 50s. What was that like?
Well, honestly, again, I just got to say that we basically had the run of the town, and Mom was working all the time, and Dad was working, and Mom was at the motel, which, where we lived.
Mm-hmm.
And I could go anywhere I wanted to in Parowan and do what I wanted and come back home. If I was on time, I didn't get in any trouble. And also the high school was right across the street and had the tennis courts. They had basketball standards, and we could go over there and play tennis, and we play basketball. And we just kept busy doing things because back then they hadn't invented Nintendo yet. And actually we didn't have TV in Parowan until I was 15 years old.
Hmm.
And then it wasn't very good. It was pretty, it had to be relayed from Salt Lake with different towers, and it actually was not very good quality, plus black and white. And the screen was like about a 15 to 17 inch screen.
Yeah. I remember you telling me about listening to the World Series and stuff at school.
Actually, the teachers wanted to keep us in school, so they'd let us listen to the World Series while we were doing our studies and doing things in math and different classwork. They just give us classwork and leave the radio on so that we could hear the World Series all the time. So that was one of the nice things about going to a small high school like that. We pretty much had a lot of freedom. And I remember listening to the World Series sitting on the front porch, and we actually couldn't get it on the house radio, but we could get it on the car radio. So Dad had it on his 56 Pontiac, and we were listening to it, and I believe it was a game that Don Larson pitched a no-hitter.
Yeah. I think that was the 56 World Series.
Yes.
Yeah. So how big, for those who don't know, well, Cedar City is that the county seat for? Actually,
Parowan is the county seat, and the courthouse up the corner from where we lived was the county courthouse. And I still think it's that way. I'm not sure they have all the offices in Parowan because I haven't lived there for quite a few years. But yeah, Parowan was actually the county seat.
Okay. And how many people are we talking when you were growing up? How many people lived in Parowan, you think?
Oh gosh, I know how big our graduating class was. We can start there. There was 31 in my graduating class. There was 101 in the top 3 grades when I was a senior. And Parowan probably had, I would guess, maybe at the most with maybe including Paraguna was maybe 1,800 people maybe.
Yeah. So we can cover a lot of things. I mean, you did a lot growing up and then after high school and college, but just kind of going back, thinking about, so you had an older brother, a younger brother. Tell us a little bit about growing up with them and a little bit about your brothers.
Well, it was interesting for me to grow up with both Mac and Eric. Eric was my older brother. Mac was my younger brother. And we were almost exactly 5 years apart. And Mom always said that she had to get over having one before she was ready to have another one because they were so, let's say, active, okay? We were all very active. Eric was the firstborn, and he ended up being really a big fellow. And he kind of...
well, he didn't end up being a big fellow. He did, but he also started as a big fellow. Tell about the record he set at the hospital.
Well, the record he set at the Cedar City Hospital, he was 27 inches long And I don't recall the weight, but I know that the 27 inches long was a record, and I'm assuming it probably still is a record. But he was pretty skinny baby. I'm saying, I hope anyway, because he was really long, and he ended up being 6'6", and he was about the same size as Dad when he got to be a man. He got to be about the same size as Dad.
Yeah.
And behind Eric, it was kind of interesting to grow up because I was always Eric's little brother. And Eric was a good athlete. He was very popular in school. Probably the toughest kid in school, for sure. I could tell you some stories about that one, but we probably maybe better not.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was interesting for me because everybody always asked me what happened to me. They says, "What happened to you? You're not very big." And I said, "Well, I got pushed away from the table all the time because Eric was so big. He would eat what he wanted and only let me eat just a little bit." But that's really not true. I just didn't inherit the big gene that was available from the Clark family. And it was actually okay for me because I was able to be a pretty good athlete because I was a little quicker and faster than most of the kids that I grew up with, and so I ended up being a pretty good athlete. And it was one of the things that was very important to me was my athletic prowess at that time, because it was a big deal in Parowan to win in basketball, and I was able to help secure a lot of wins when I was playing basketball. But being Eric's little brother too, I didn't get picked on very much after I got a little bit older. And in elementary, I was really quite small. I got picked on quite a bit. And as I grew and got a little bit older, and Eric was in high school, and I got older, the kids saw that I was Eric's brother, and so they didn't pester me too much, because if they did, and Eric found out about it, he would take care of it. So it didn't happen very often after I got older. And I got where I could take a little bit better care of myself too, because I caught up in my growth cycle.
Yeah.
But Eric was he was fun to be around. We laughed and we had great times together. After he got married and left home, and he would go work on jobs, he was very good at construction. And when I was going to college, during the time off, during the summer, he would get me a job, and I would be able to go work construction and make some good money to get back into school. And it actually helped me get through college without having a big debt when I got through school, because I was able to make enough money with some of the jobs. And he always helped me, and I was always accepted because Eric was my brother. And every job he was on, he was called Hoss. He was Big Hoss, and he had the respect of everybody that he worked for.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, that was one of his nicknames when he was on jobs.
That was one of Waylon Jennings' nicknames, so was Hoss. But
yeah, right.
And I think
Hoss Cartwright.
Yeah. So your younger brother. So Eric was, he was quite the outdoorsman too. I know he trapped and loved fishing, and
yeah, he wasn't as much a fisherman as he was a trapper or hunter.
Yeah,
he did enjoy fishing. But he loved to trap and he loved to hunt. He loved guns, and he just loved the outdoors. And of course, Dad was a game warden at that time for the Fish and Game, and so we were able to go with him a lot. And I tell people I actually grew up in the shotgun seat of a pickup because I was there a lot, and Dad would go and drop me off, say at the Yankee, and I could fish for an hour while he went and checked people or whatever he was doing. And then he'd come back and get me, and then we'd sometimes go home or go on to another place.
Yeah.
And Eric basically did a lot the same. He grew up a lot faster than I did, and he also started working a lot younger. When he was 15, he was working the cement jobs up at it was actually the care center that was built, and he got a job there. I think he was 15, just turning 16. And then he worked up on the mountain some, and he loved to be in the mountains. Mm-hmm. And he was able to help build some of the fence up at the Yankee when they were doing the worm log fence back there. Back in those days, they were dragging the logs down with the big work plug, and then Eric was one of the workers. and I got to go up and observe that. I was a little bit too young to work, but it was very interesting.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say that worm fence, they just barely replaced that up by the Yankee.
See, and this would be probably, I was probably maybe 12 when that was being built, 11 or 12. So that's how old it was. It was there for a long time. And of course, Grandpa owned the Yankee when he first came out from New York and then from back east. And he owned the Yankee and had a place there where they run cows, and they had a dairy, and they had a cabin that they stayed in, plus the dairy barn. And so we were very familiar with the Yankee, and actually the Yankee was named after my grandpa because he was a Yankee from New York, and he owned the property. And the Clark family owned it until it was lost to the government for taxes after my grandfather died in the Depression.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about that. Obviously, the Yankees, a place we both love, and you used to take me fishing up there all the time as a kid, and so we've caught a lot of fish and spent a lot of time not catching fish up there too.
Yeah.
But so tell us a little bit. We'll maybe talk a little bit about Mac, and then we'll just so people know the characters as we talk about some of these stories. But
okay,
your little brother Mac, it seemed like he was always kind of the comedian, and I just remember with you and Eric and in the same room, and especially Grandpa, you could shake the whole house with your laughter. But Mac seemed to be kind of the real character.
He was, and I always thought Mac he felt like he had a lot to live up to Eric and me and some of the things that we did. And he tried to outdo us a lot of times with some of the stuff that he did. And we can talk about that and some of the legal stuff that he did anyway.
Yeah.
But, yeah, Mac was awesome. I teased him a lot when he was a kid. I always teased him. I remember probably the time I really got him good was we were out in the shed. It was behind the part of the cabins there that we had that we rented out there in Parowan. We were in the shed, and I told him, I says, "I'm not supposed to tell you this, Mac, but you're adopted." And he says, "What? What's that mean?" I said, "Well, you're adopted." I said, "You're actually an Indian." And the Indians dropped you off here, and Mom and Dad felt so bad for you that they adopted you. And so he actually believed that till he was about 13 or 14, that he was adopted.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, yeah, I gave him quite a bad time when he was growing up, because Eric gave me a bad time. Eric would come home, and I'd be asleep, and he'd been out on a date or something, and we slept in the basement all the time, and Eric and I slept in the same bed. It was a double bed, and because he was so hard to sleep with, my mother would roll up a blanket and put it between us so that he wouldn't keep bumping into me and whatever at night when he slept. And he would come home, and he'd take off his socks and stuff, and he'd wave them in front of my nose all the time until I'd wake up. And then he'd just laugh at me, but he did that quite often, every once in a while anyway. But
yeah.
Anyway, and then Mac went on to be a pretty good athlete. He was one of the most popular kids in school. The kids just loved to be around him because he was so much fun all the time. He did a few things that with his cars. He loved cars, and he always had a really nice car. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to tell a story anyway. He liked to drink a little bit of beer once in a while, and so he didn't want to get caught with an open container. So he hooked up his windshield wiper and run it through the dash. And then he filled his windshield wiper thing full of beer, and then he could just hit the windshield wiper and fill his beer up. So he never got caught with an open container. But anyway, he was a character. I'm telling you, he was he was a lot of fun to be around, and the kids just loved to be with him, and he was very, very popular in school.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually went to Cedar High School for the last couple of years because Mom and Dad moved to Cedar just after I graduated. So,
Was he as big as Eric?
he was just a little bit bigger than me. He was just
okay.
a little bit heavier, and he was about 6'2", and I was about 6'1".
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So going back now, so Grandma and Grandpa to me, but tell us a little bit about your mom and dad, both born and raised in Parowan as well, right?
Yeah. Mom and Dad were both born in Parowan. And let me start with Dad. And Dad was born when his father was 63 years old. His father married my grandmother late in life, and he was his first wife passed away, and then he had 3 children with his second wife, Nellie McAllister Clark, and
From Kanab.
from Kanab. Yeah, Nellie was from Kanab, and anyway, Dad was the last one born, and he was 63 when Dad was born, and he died when Dad was I think 11. I'm not sure, but so he actually is depended on his older brother Edgar to help him, and Edgar was most of the time away herding sheep and trying to keep money in the family.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad would go to school and then not drop out. Drop out was not a word back then. He would not go to school and work and help, and a lot of times he had to stop and not go to school and work to help support the family, because times were very tough, because he was born in 1912, and so in 1920, when times were really rough, well, he would have been about
8 years old.
about
Yeah.
8 years old, yeah. And Grandpa died just shortly after that, and so he had to do that. He eventually got his high school diploma, and he was on one of the basketball teams back then that was very famous because they were also tall.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad was 6'5", and he was the tallest, and then there was 6'4", 6'3", 6'2", 6'2", and then they had one shorter fellow that was like 6 foot. And they actually played for the state championship the year he was a senior, but they were beat by East High School. Back then, you had to beat everybody in the state to be the state champion. And he actually played against my college coach, Cleo Petty, in one game up there, and Cleo was very fast. My dad wasn't very fast, at 6'6" and about 220, 230. And Cleo kept going past him, so Dad just grabbed him by the jersey and ripped his jersey and set him down on the ground. Of course, they called a foul, but anyway, it kind of changed the game a little bit, and Parowan was able to win that game. But anyway, later on in my college career, Cleo was my college coach at Cedar City.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got articles about Dad's scoring and everything, and some of the things that he did, and I've got all of that, and it's pretty interesting to read. Back then, when they played basketball, after every score, they go back and jump center.
Yeah.
And so they kind of could control the game pretty well because they were so tall.
Yeah.
And their coach, they have a picture with all of the players, and the coach is in between my dad, and I don't recall who the other player was, but their arms are over each other's shoulders, and the coach is standing below about an inch or two below their arms. He's really a little short guy, so it's kind of funny.
These are all Parowan. Sorry, I'm just wondering what's in the water there if everyone's so tall.
Well,
Doesn't Parowan mean?
Parowan means, I think it means evil water.
Oh.
Okay, and the Indian name for named it Parowan because it's evil water. Because some of the Indians were the Indian ladies, I'm going to call them ladies, down at the Little Salt Lake, and they were cleaning their clothes, and they were cleaning them, and apparently a spirit came up out of the water, and so they thought it was evil, and so they called it Parowan, evil water. And then Paraguna means, I I think it's Red Water or Muddy Water. I'm not sure because there's Red Creek. All the water there comes out of Red Creek. Yeah. Dad was a great outdoorsman. He had a real love for the wildlife, and he grew up helping with the sheep and helping with the cattle. He traveled with his dad when his dad went on some trips. We can talk about a trip where he carried $40,000 for Grandpa later on. But he grew up in the outdoors, and he ended up being a game warden and was very efficient at being a game warden. He had a love for the outdoors. He had a love for animals. And he was warden, and he went to district warden, and then he went to regional coordinator. And as a regional coordinator, he had, I think it was 37 people underneath him, and he had just a little bit more than a third of the state, because the southern part of the state, when it's divided into sections, was the largest section of the state that was taken care of by the wildlife resource. It's now wildlife resources. They changed it.
I think it's even might be just DNR, natural resources now.
Right, it is, yeah. Because it all went, it used to be fish and game, then they changed it to Division of Wildlife Resources, and then it was put under the Natural Resources Division.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, I can mention this because Dad always mentioned it to me. When that first started, Governor Rampton assigned one man to be over the natural resources in Utah. And as that grew larger and larger and it got bigger, at last when Dad retired, and I don't recall exactly the day he retired or the year, but there was 200 people in the office of Division of Natural Resources. So that's how much it grew, and you know how government grows anyway.
Oh, it never constricts or contracts, right?
Contract, right. But yeah, Dad was so good to be with, and we would go out in the mountains, and he knew every trail. He knew what the deer were going to where they were going to be, what they do when they saw us. He just was so fun to hunt with, that because he knew everything that was going on out in the mountains, and he just had such a feel for it. I remember one time Outdoor Life sent, if I can think of his name here, it'll come to me in a minute. One of the most famous writers came out to write a story about hunting deer in Parowan and Paraguna. And we stayed at the cabin, the fishing game cabin at Panguitch Lake that night. And he was talking about what he was going to do the next day and how he was going to ride a horse, and he was making fun. Ride a horse, and he was going to jump off the horse and shoot the deer and everything. And then he was going to write a story about it. So Dad got some of his wardens to have him, Byron Dalrymple, that's his name, Byron Dalrymple. He had him down at the bottom of this canyon on horseback with 2 or 3 of the wardens. And the wardens were making a drive up to where Dad and I was, and Dad put me down at this area where I could see when the deer were going to come out. He knew they'd come out there because he knew what they were going to do. And then he moved over about, maybe 20 yards and sat so he'd have a different angle. And he said, when it comes out, you shoot it. I want you to shoot it. And I said, okay, I will. And if it's a good buck, shoot it. So we waited, and I could hear him coming, and I heard the deer came out, and I just barely saw it, and bang. And I looked up, and Dad shot it. And he's just a hunter. He saw the deer, he shot it. So I didn't get a chance. Well, anyway, they took pictures with him and this Byron Dalrymple, of course, who claimed to shoot the deer in the book. I've still got the story. And he talked about the story and how he got the chance to hunt with, Grandpa's nickname was Bid, B-I-D. And he said in the story, he says, I got to hunt with Big, B-I-G, Clank, C-L-A-N-K, not Clark. That's how he spelled it. So anyway, in the story, when he shot the deer, and he got to hunt with Big Clank, and he shot the deer right off of the horse, of course, you know. Yeah. And I don't know whether he was on the move or what, but anyway, it was quite a story. So I never read too many of the stories in those magazines after that.
It's funny because in the hunting community now, that same kind of thing happen. Instead of instead of authors of magazines and stuff, it's these influencers who are on Instagram and they're hunters, and it's the same kind of thing where they find out that they're shooting some deer where they weren't supposed to be shooting, and they go and they kill a deer for the story, and you just hear these horror stories of them leaving the deer overnight, and the coyotes eat it, but they don't care because they got their pictures with the
right.
For Instagram. And anyway, so I guess it was happening back then.
Well, that brings up a story I've got to tell you too. Two of them really. They used to have the road to Las Vegas in California used to go through Santa Clara and down the back way, what they call Utah Hill. And just before the border, they would set up a roadblock and check everybody that came through with deer. And the reason they did that was to find out where the deer were killed and if the person was licensed and so on, so they could keep statistics on where the deer were being shot. One guy came through, and they went back and looked at it, and he had and they used to use a tag. You'd have to use your tag. You'd be given a tag when you got your license, and you'd put the tag on your deer so that it was a legal kill. They went back, and this guy had killed a donkey and tagged it. And another guy...
Well, tell him where he killed it. Where'd the guy say he killed it? Do you remember?
Oh, that was another one. That's another story. Okay. I'll tell that one after this one. The next one is this guy shot a deer and tagged it and threw it in the back of his truck, and he's going through the checking station. So they go back to check it, and they went back, and it was like a 2-point, but it hadn't been gutted, and it had been killed 2 or 3 days before that, so it was bloated up. And the warden says, "Boy, that's a pretty good sized deer." And he says, "Yeah, it's getting bigger every day." So anyway, that and one time when we were hunting up at Round Meadow above Paragoona, it's a really good place to hunt. We like to hunt there. And Dad stopped this fellow, and he had a doe. And back then you couldn't shoot does unless you had a doe tag. And the doe tags were down all that particular year in Zion. Okay, so in the Zion area. And it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and Dad was checking this fellow, and he said, where's your tag and your license? And he pulled it out, and he showed Dad, and Dad says, "Well, that deer can't be shot here. That's illegal." And he said, "Oh, I got that in East Zone." He said, "I got it in East Zone." Dad says, "You mean East Zion?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you know how far away that is?" And he said, "No." And he said, "You couldn't have shot it today and got it here in that much time." And so he had to give him a ticket. But anyway, East Zone.
Yeah, East Zion. So that's for those who, Zion National Park. Zion, as everyone says outside of Utah, but Utahns say Zion. Anyway, so Zion is you can't hunt in the national park, but there are regions around that are called the Zion Unit. So, yeah, that's what he was referring to then at that time.
Right.
East Zone.
Yeah. So it's usually the area surrounding there. So Grandpa, he would have been, he retired about 1980, I think. So, and he was in the, started 1940, or he was there for about 40 years, wasn't he?
I think it was more like 36. Dad went joined the Army during the war, and he left when I was 2, so that would have been 1944. And he returned in 46, and so he was actually rehired after he got back and put back into service because he'd worked for a couple of years before he left. Yeah, he enlisted and went to actually the Philippines, and I can't remember the other place.
Guam?
It was I'll think of it later. Anyway. And then when he returned, I was 4 years old, because that's probably is my earliest memory of my dad, is when he came home, because the bus came around the turn up north end or south end of Parowan, and it looked so huge to me. And it came down and stopped in front of the drugstore where the bus stop was, and he got off of that bus, and it's a magnificent memory that I can remember. And he was in his uniform and so big, and it was just it was really memorable to me, and I'll never forget that.
Yeah. Well, you would have been. It probably had to be your first memory, because if he left when you were 2, you wouldn't have.
Right.
Probably wouldn't have remembered. But yeah, we have that footage of you. It would have been that time when he had just got home and he's in his uniform, and you and Eric are running up and giving him hugs, and
Right.
it's on that old would have been 8mm film.
Yeah.
So that's pretty neat. So he, well, speaking of the war, since you brought that up, tell us a little bit of stories about. So he would have been how old if he joined that?
He was 30 when I was born, so he would have been 32 when he left and 34 when he got home.
Yeah. So he, like you said, he volunteered, and I know you said he, like a lot of war veterans, they don't tend to tell a lot of stories, but Jughead,
yeah,
tells maybe just a story or two about what Grandpa did
okay,
over there.
All right. When he got through basic training, well, let me first say too that he actually wouldn't have had to go because of his age and his family, but he volunteered, and he also was in charge of all the rationing stamps back during the war. And so he rationed out tires, anything with rubber, sugar, all those different kinds of things. He had to give rationing stamps to the people who needed it, to make sure they needed it to use it. And they had to buy their food with rationing stamps, because things had to be rationed back at that time, because there wasn't a lot of things available like there is now today. But then he decided to join, and so he joined. And after he got out of basic training, he and a fellow, and I can't even remember his real name now. I'd have to look it up. But his nickname was Jughead. They were both picked to be as MPs, or military police. They went to military police training, and then were shipped to the Philippine Islands. And some of the duties that they had were to break up fights between the Marines and the Navy, or the Army and the Marines. And sometimes they were called out. They'd get in a paddy wagon and go to these fights and have to break up the fights. And Dad would never talk about anything other than a couple of things. He talked about some of the people that were over him were higher in rank in military, and some of the things that happened, and some of the dumb things that they did. But Jughead was with him the whole entire time during the war, during that time. And he was from Louisiana, and he came out and stayed with us, and he was out back, and we had a big fire out by our clothesline, which is in the backyard. And he was cooking Louisiana stew. He wanted to make the Louisiana stew for us. And he had a big Dutch oven and was making this Louisiana stew over the fire. And he started talking to us and telling us about Dad and some of the things that he did. And the most memorable thing that I remember him saying was that he said, all I had to do was load them up when they come out the door. He says, I'd send your dad in, and as they came out the door, flying out the door, I just put them in the paddy wagon, and then he'd come out and we'd take them back and lock them up. And he said, I never had to go inside. And, Dad was a big man, and he was always cool under pressure. He never lashed out at anybody, but he was always cool, and he demanded respect because of his size and also his demeanor. And this brings back a memory to me that was really strong. We were playing against Cedar City, and Cedar City was our rival. And the old Parowan coach was coaching Cedar, and before the game, he told me that he knew how to hold me down, and he's going to keep me scoreless and whatever. It was giving me a bad time. And then during the game, and it was packed. If you can imagine, back then everybody went to basketball games. It was packed, and there was people along the end line, and there was this guy who had been drinking quite a bit from Cedar City, and I came in and made a layup, and the guy knocked me down, and I slid, and I got underneath his feet, and I got up, and he called me a SOB, and I said, right here after the game, and then I just run back in and played the rest of the game, and I actually got 22 points, and we beat Cedar again. We always beat Cedar in basketball.
Make sure we get this on record.
Right. Well, I can pull out the slip I got right here. Anyway, after the game, I went down and I started arguing with the guy and telling him that he couldn't be calling me a SOB. And all of a sudden, I saw a wave coming down off the bleachers. And it was just like the Red Sea was parting. And it was Dad coming down to see what was going on. And he came down and he said, what happened? And I said, he called me an SOB. He reached out and grabbed him by the throat and picked him up off the ground with one hand and had his fist doubled up. He had his right hand, and he had the guy with the 6 inches off the ground. And I started begging him, don't hit him, Dad, you'll kill him. And finally he let him down. But yeah, he was very protective of Mom, and he didn't call anybody in our family an SOB, or Dad would make sure it didn't happen again.
Yeah.
But it actually scared me because I thought he was really going to hurt him.
Well,
yeah.
I can tell you stories about you.
No, we won't go there.
Is this something like similar happen?
Yeah, but so I was a freshman, I think. A freshman or a sophomore. I think I was a freshman because I wasn't. It was a varsity game, baseball. You were the head coach at Kearns, and playing Taylorsville, who was our rival, who beat us probably a couple more times than we beat them, but we always liked to upset them. But they were always competing for state. They're a really good program. I don't know if they're any good anymore, but anyhow, I'm sure things change. But anyhow, he's tight game. He goes out. Yeah, I think I was a freshman. He goes out to argue a call because Taylorsville would always argue a call, and then the umpire would start to cave to them, and he would give them more calls. And so my dad, I think after their coach, anyway, he goes out and argues, and the umpire says, "Now he calls him an SOB."
Uh-huh.
And it took 3 adult coaches to like grab him and hold him back. And you would have been, when I was in high school, you were over 50, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it would have had to been. Anyway, I got to the game late, and everyone, I think it was my mom comes around. Oh, you would not believe it. They had to pull Dad off the field with 3 guys.
All the time, it's either your dad or Brady. Something is going on at a game.
Well,
I was just going to say, too, a compliment that I feel like you guys have both inherited being cool under pressure for the most part.
Yeah.
But truly, like, if there's like an emergency, I feel like you guys, even Nisha, too. I don't know, Brady, maybe he's the same way. He seems pretty calm, and you could just like handle it, I'm not that way at all. Like, if there's an emergency, I'm calling you or asking you or screaming or.
Yeah. Anyway.
But
yeah, so.
I guess unless someone says the wrong thing, then you're not as cool.
Yeah, Chuck Volgranic was the umpire behind the plate. And he's the one that had the big pad, back in the old days.
Yeah.
He just stuck with that. And he came out and got between me, or I probably would have got to the guy. And Chuck, I knew Chuck really well. And he just says, Kenyon, he says, don't do this. It's not worth it. And finally I calmed down enough to leave the field. And then anyway, I didn't feel good about it after, but I felt good about being protective of what I was being called. I did. Yeah, back then.
Anyway,
I want to tell you that brings up a lot of things about my dad. Cool under pressure, because anytime anything happened in Parowan, they came to get my dad. I remember twice during a basketball game, a guy had a heart attack, and they'd have my dad go get called a resuscitator, he was the fire chief. And he'd get the resuscitator and then put him on oxygen, and it would always breathe for them. It was called a resuscitator. And that happened twice when I was playing. And what was funny is they were both on the front row, right about center court. And when prisoners had to be taken from the jail to Salt Lake, they'd have my dad do it. It was just any pressure situation, they called on Saunders Clark.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, he was, and that's, I guess we should transition or talk about her grandma as well, because she was, just as, in my mind, although quiet and behind the scenes, she was just as big of a figure as Grandpa was.
She was awesome. She was the one who was always sacrificing. She reminds me of Sarah some. Growing up, she couldn't see very well because she had some problems with her eyes, but she was able to graduate high school with high honors, and then she went to college and was going to college, and times got tough, and her sister Claudia was 2 years older than her, was also in college, and Grandpa talked to him, and my mother said that he couldn't afford to have both of them go to college right now, and they were going to have to, one of them would have to drop out. And again, they didn't say drop out back then. They'd have to quit school and come and work at the store. So my mother volunteered to do that, and she was the younger sister. And so she came back and worked in the store, and so Claudia was able to go on and get her 4-year degree and become a school teacher. And shortly after that, Mom started school again, and then her little brother, Ken Joseph, came along and got to college. And Grandpa says, "I'm sorry, I can't pay for both of you. Ken, either you or Kathleen will have to drop out. I keep saying drop out, quit school, and come back and help in the store." And so my mother volunteered again. And so Ken was able to go on and get a degree, and it took him quite a while because he had some issues with some of his lifestyle, but he actually got through school and did very well. So my mother was always the one that was going to sacrifice, and so she went back to school, but she only got a couple of years of schooling in, and she probably, if that wouldn't have happened, she probably would have got 4 years. But it didn't faze her at all, because she was willing to sacrifice for her brother and her sister.
Yeah.
And then we lived in the big Clark home up on the south west corner of Parowan. And then we moved down to the motel, because when Dad got back from the service, he wanted to build a motel. And so we got the motel built, and I was 5 when we moved there. So my mother was raising Eric and Mac and myself, and she was also taking care of all the motel rooms. There were 7 rooms, and so she did the cleaning, the vacuuming. She did all the washing of the sheets. She did everything for those rooms. And she did that all the time, as well as trying to ride herd on me and Mac and Eric, which wasn't an easy task. And she only got really upset with me once, where she just didn't say, "When Dad gets home, I'll let him take care of it." And that she always just did that, and she never got after me ever, except for one time, and I don't recall what I did, but boy, she was mad at me. And she got a willow and was trying to catch me, and of course she couldn't catch me. And I ran through behind the motel and up around the dairy, and I ditched her. But anyway, Dad took care of it when he got home.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was just so gentle and so kind. And I never heard her say a bad word about anybody. And I actually wrote a poem about her because I was so impressed with her meekness and her gentleness and her kind nature that I just wrote a poem. And I write poetry sometimes. And I remember Richard Woodbury, who became a very good friend. He married Christine Forsyth, our cousin, from our mom's sister Claudia was the mother. Anyway, he told me one time in confidence, well, not in confidence, we were just talking, and he said, you know what, I think when your mother passes away, she's not going to stay here. She'll just get angel wings and fly to heaven, because she is the sweetest woman I've ever been around. And everybody felt that way about her.
Yeah.
And she just was just a genuine lady is what she was. And she had a good teacher in her home, because she was a Joseph, and Grandma Joseph was a very stern, gentle woman, and a very, very hard worker. The Josephs were very hard-working people.
Yeah.
And so she learned that. She worked hard. She helped in the store all the time, and she was just. And she made the best bread ever. I wished I had the recipe and I could do it with her technique, the way she does, and make it as good, because she was such a good cook. And I think I ate at the lunchroom in school maybe twice during my 12 years of school. I would go home for lunch. Of course, I only had to walk across the street. Yeah. But it's uphill both ways, because the road has got a crown in it, so it was uphill both ways.
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, for those of us who knew Grandma, always have the fondest memories, and like you said, she couldn't see very well. And that was toward the end there. I mean, Grandpa could see, but he couldn't move around very well, and she couldn't see, but she could move around fairly well. And
they were a perfect match.
Yeah. But now, Grandma, you're saying she had bad eyesight, poor eyesight. Was the story that she wrecked on her bike, or what was that story?
That wasn't the reason she did. She had macular degeneration, I think it's called, or macular degeneration. But she did wrecked on her bike, and she was. We used to ride up to the 4-Bay all the time when we were kids, and apparently she did too. And when you come down, it's quite a steep road, and it's good asphalt, so you can really wheel. And she hit something and came off of her bike, and she ripped down below this eye right here on her. I think it was her left eye. It was her left eye.
Yeah.
And then they had to graft a piece of skin on, and you could always see where that skin was because of that.
Oh, okay. I thought she had damaged one of her eyes.
I don't think so. I think what happened is they were trying to help her up at the University of Utah, and they operated on it, and it actually made it worse. Something they did. They were trying to fix her. I can't remember the name of the part of her eye. Anyway, it just didn't turn out very well.
But do you have some questions you wanted to ask? I know. Well, you don't have to.
No, not that I can think of right now.
Okay.
I feel like she does sound like an angel, so I appreciate that I can remind you of her a little bit.
Yeah. Well, more than a little bit. You put up with quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember what I was going to ask now.
Well, I was wondering, it's more like the fish and game part, like how big that area was, because he's like the man in charge, and it's like a huge area of southern Utah, you were saying before. So, and it just seems like so remote, like it would take him a long time probably to get to some places, like if there's a problem, right?
Yeah, and he basically let his people handle it, and he was very good at delegating, and he knew who was able to do what, and he hired very good people, and most of them, as he worked with and ended up being in charge of, were people he worked with to start with on the same level.
Oh.
So he basically knew most of those people. And as the area became more complicated, and with the new laws and everything, he had to hire more people. And what would happen a lot of times is they'd hire them in Salt Lake and then send them to him. And if they were not capable, he would send them back.
Yeah.
Say, I can't use this man because he doesn't love nature. He doesn't love the animals.
Right.
He doesn't know what he's doing. He's very book smart, but we don't do books here in southern Utah. I don't think any of the other regional directors did that, but they didn't have the clout that my dad had.
Yeah.
Because my dad, I'm almost certain, could have been the fishing game director, but he didn't want to do that. And any time it was mentioned, he said, no, I want to live in Parowan, and I want to stay in southern Utah.
Yeah.
So I know that happened a lot. He actually got me a job when I graduated high school to go to Fish Lake, and I worked creel census, which I checked fishermen all day long. And I checked at Upper Box Creek, Lower Box Creek, Casharum, Fish Lake, Johnson's Reservoir, and 7 Mile. And so I had quite a large area. And he got me that job, and so I was able to work for the fishing game. I wore like a uniform and everything, but I didn't give tickets or anything. I just checked the fishermen to see how many fish they were catching and what kind of condition the fish were in, because all that needed to be taken care of so they could know whether to plant fish or not plant fish or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then the following year, I worked at Una Mountains. He got me the job up there, and what we did up there, we did biological survey on all the lakes, and I had to ride horses and backpack in, and we had to take, of course, our own food, and we'd go in for usually 20 days, sometimes a little bit longer. I did the work up there, so he got me that job, which I was very good at because I knew everything that was happening because of being with him all the time. Mm-hmm. And the second year, the second time I worked up there, I went up there, and I would go in and my hair would be, back then I had quite a bit of hair, and my hair would get too long and I'd look really shaggy. And so I go home and Dad says, let me give you a haircut. And so I'm sitting on the front porch and he starts to cut it and he can't get it right. So he keeps cutting, and finally it's got to come off. And he just took it off as close as the clipper would get it. And the following week, he was in Salt Lake with the fishing game director. And I came out in a pickup, and they passed me coming out, and the director saw my bald head, and he says, who is that? You go fire him right now. He told the drivers, you go fire him right now. My dad said, that's my son. And I cut his hair. He said, don't fire him. So anyway, yeah, he had a lot of clout. Any time that he was together with his men, he was definitely the leader. They all looked to him, and not just because he was their boss. He just had that demeanor which he demanded respect.
Right.
And they loved him. They did. They all loved him. And one thing interesting about him is he knew all 37 of the people that worked for him, and he knew all their children by name.
Oh, that's cool.
And anytime they came in the office, he would always say, how's this, and how's this kid doing, and how's this doing?
Yeah.
And he was amazing that way. I wished I could do that, and I never been able to. But he was so good at it that way. And and he worked with some rough guys too, but they did what they were supposed to do because of how they respected him.
Right.
Yeah. So to give people an idea, on the map, he covered the southern. There's 29 counties in Utah, I think.
I thought it was 28. I don't know.
I
used to know when I was in high school.
Yeah,
we had to memorize them all.
I think it's 29.
Might be.
But he covered the 13 southern counties.
Yes.
And so that's essentially, it's about everything under I-70, I believe. And that covers southern Utah, the bottom corner of St. George, Washington County, Iron County, Cedar City, Beaver County. And then as you come over, there's Paiute,
Garfield,
Kane, Sevier County. And then if you go over, you've got Grand, so Moab.
Right. Yeah.
Below that, I guess it goes right into San Juan, which is Blanding, Monticello area.
Right.
So he covered a huge region, and now everyone, Arches National Park, Canyonlands, Capitol Reef, Zion National Park, and Bryce. So all 5 of the major national parks are in that region. Of course, you can't hunt or fish in those parks, but my point is he covered a huge area.
Lake Powell.
Yeah, Lake Powell, part of that. And so anyway, it's a big area. And speaking of Lake Powell, Grandpa didn't they use him to kind of help survey the area before they built the dam?
He was actually a guide for the government people to show them where the lake would when it was built, where the dam would be built, where it would rise and what would be covered. And he took them along. I think it would have been the west rim of basically all of those tributaries, and took them through there with a Jeep. And that was before the dam was built. He was one of the people that showed the government people around, so they had a good idea of what was going to happen.
Okay. And then another thing too is the tie with Lake Powell is and Eric got you a job, right? Working on the diversion tunnel, or
yeah. Mm-hmm. Eric was working on the reception. I think they call it a reception station back then. It's kind of a visitor center, what they call it now. And I worked on the diversion tunnel. We were tying iron down in the diversion tunnel before they poured the cement, and it was 12 bar, which is huge, and it's a 40-foot radius around it's 40 foot around the area, and so we were doing 40-foot pieces of rebar around to cover it, and it was heavy. It took 3 of us to put it up, and I think I worked there for 6 weeks, and then we kind of finished up the job there. But back then, I was going to school, and I had just previously gotten married, and we were not really too well off financially, and so I finished the quarter. Eric got me. Back then, it was quarters instead of semesters. Eric got me a job with. It was Muncie, was the name of the company, and they were doing the rebar. And a fellow had fallen down there and was in really bad shape in the hospital, and they needed to replace him, and Eric told him that I would do it. And I'd never tied iron in my life, but Eric told him I could tie iron, and so they gave me the job. And so I got there and I worked six weeks and made enough money to pay for college for another year. We were getting paid $6.10 an hour. At that time, I was making $1.65 working at a gas station part-time after school. And that's how much I was making. It was $6.10 an hour. It was absolutely tons of money back then. And it was really a good job for me to have because it helped us pay for another year of school. So
that would have been about what year?
65, because Nisha was my oldest daughter, or my only daughter, and the oldest one was about probably 6 months old back then.
So 66 maybe. Then, right?
Yeah, it was 65, 66, right in there, yeah.
And it's been a couple years ago, but we looked up with inflation what $6.10 an hour would be in today's money. Of course, we've had a ton of inflation now. But 4 or 5 years ago, it was $47 an hour. Mm-hmm. So it'd probably be $65 an hour.
I would imagine it was just a dream. It was, and I didn't know how to tie iron, but I got in there and watched other people tie iron, and just started doing it. It just wasn't that big of a deal.
Tell the story about the guy who broke his arm.
One day I show up to work, and I'm working side by side with this guy, and I think he'd been drinking all night. I could smell it on him. And we actually had put the rebar in the wrong angle, and the boss was making us move it back about 3 feet so that it was in the correct angle. And so we were cutting the top and cutting the middle and just moving it over. We didn't cut the bottom, just the middle and the top. We'd move it over about 3 feet and retie it in the middle and the top. And so what you do when you're up that high, we were almost 500 feet up on a 2% grade. So we had to put a safety belt on while we were doing our work. And while we're doing our work, we'd put it on a cross piece and then cut one and move it, and then take your safety belt and put it on another one. And this guy put his safety belt on the one that he was going to cut and didn't realize it. So he cut it. The middle guy had cut his. He cut his, and so all of a sudden he starts going like this, and the guy halfway down grabbed the bar and took him and slammed him in the side, and then it slid down, and it just snapped the guy's arm right there in half, and he was just screaming. He was in so much pain. But he saved the guy's life, because he would have gone on a 2% grade. He'd probably gone another about 400 feet down, hitting and bouncing and whatever. He never would have made it.
Yeah.
But that was kind of scary, because I was just right next to him, and all of a sudden he just was gone. I mean, he just was going. There was nothing I could do. It was a crazy, crazy time.
Wow.
Yeah.
But anyway, and I got another story too, because I had never welded or cut steel or whatever. And the boss came up and he says, "We need to cut some of this rebar and cut it down to a better size." We were cutting a little piece of it off.
Uh-huh.
And he said, "Clark, I want you to run the torch and cut it. And then the other guy can grab it and take care of it." And I said, "Okay." And he kind of left and was walking off. I didn't even know how to light the torch. And I'd watched him do it, so I started to try and light it. I turned it on, I started lighting it, and I got this big flame coming out of it, and finally I got it touched to where it was nice and blue and I could use it. And I start cutting it, and it just starts popping like crazy. Well, I didn't know if you put it too close, it pops. And the guy says, "Back it off a little bit, Clark, my gosh." And I said, "Well, you know what? If you're so damn good at this, you do it." And so he did it for the rest of the day, and I didn't have to do it because I didn't know what I was doing. And anyway, that's how I got out of that one.
Yeah.
That day.
Was that the same time you were, or maybe you were dating Mom, but you were driving
Actually, we'd been married because we had Nisha
oh,
during that time.
and you were driving the truck, and the people had to follow you?
That was when we were dating. That's when I was working on the road. I worked for a company from out of Colorado called Tiago, and the boss just for some reason really liked my work, and so he gave me an easy job of driving the pilot car, and it's a truck, and it says "Pilot car, follow me." And I'm driving, and you can only go 20 miles an hour on the fresh chips that they put down. Okay, or it just throws rocks and breaks windshields and whatever. So I'm driving it, and I'd been up till about 3 or 4 in the morning with my soon-to-be wife, and just talking basically. And then I went to bed about 4:30, and the boss would always get us up at 5:30 at the motel. So he got us up and, "Come on, we got to go lay some chips." He was a drinker, and it was, "Come on, let's go lay some chips, boys. Let's get out of bed." And you hated to hear that in the morning, no matter what. But anyway, and so I was driving the pilot car, and you can only go 20. And you do that for 8 hours, it's hard to stay awake. And I'm going up the road, and all of a sudden I'm just, I'm doing this. And finally I go to sleep. And so I go off on with the pilot car, and I go down to the barrel pit. And luckily it wasn't really deep. And it woke me up, and so I just turned and went back up on the road, and I looked back in the rearview mirror, and everybody's going down to the barrel pit and coming back up. And anyway, I stayed awake for the rest of the time, but I was having a hard time because I was really tired. I didn't get much sleep, about maybe a half hour.
Yeah. I just remember these stories, growing up and telling the stories about working with Eric, and you tell me too how Eric, if he didn't like the job or the boss, he'd you say he'd just drag up and
Yep.
he'd be out of there.
Yeah. Construction guys are very unique, and you got to love them because they're just so down to earth, and they just tell it like it is. They're just different than the rest of the population in the world, and I have so much respect for them because they work so hard and they go in any condition and they build things, and it's just amazing the things that they do and the attitude that they have about doing it.
Yeah.
And Eric had one boss that just kept yelling at him, and Eric he does not like to be didn't like to be yelled at. And the guy just kept yelling at him, and so he just finally he just drug up. And that night where they were staying, all the construction workers, he went and bought a can of dog food, and he went and knocked on this guy's door. And the guy answered the door, and he said, "You barked at me all day long, and here's some food for you." So he grabbed him and shoved some of this dog food in his mouth and then walked off. And the guy couldn't do anything about it. Anyway, he said, "You're not going to bark at me anymore, but here's some dog food for you."
Oh, my gosh. I've never heard that one.
Yeah. Yeah, Eric, he was a character.
Yeah, he was. He got me in trouble a few times, but
Back then, you guys used to get in a few fights. It's changed now, but
you can't do what we used to do. And it was one of my favorite things to do when I was a young boy is after the basketball games when I was 10, 12, 13, is go watch the fights after the games because there would always be fights, and almost always, especially between Cedar and Parowan or whatever. And they'd fight, and somebody'd win, and they'd get up and shake hands, and it was over.
yeah,
And it's just not the same anymore. But back then, it happened a lot because of things that were said, and not anything that's said like it is said now. It was just some name calling and stuff, and somebody get an argument and fight. And yeah,
tell him about that when Eric you got in I think you were at a bar and you got in a fight and.
we're not supposed to talk about bars on this tape. It was actually Eric's birthday, and we had just I was just finishing up guard camp, and so we went out to the Sportsman's there in Cedar City, and there was a kid named I'll say his name because he's gone. His name Bobby Bullock, and he was always causing trouble with everybody, especially college kids. He liked to fight the football players, get beat up, and tell about it and talk about it. And he was just crazy. And so we're sitting there at the table, and there's me and Eric and Bob Homer, who is one of my best friends ever. And Bob Homer had a cast clear to his arm because he broke his arm in football. He was a football player at Cedar for the college. And Bobby comes over and starts harping at us and calling us names and stuff, and he just wants a fight. And so I stood up and I said, "Well, you can fight me if you want, but let's go outside." And he gave me a shove, and then the bartender came over the bar and hit me over the head with a full beer bottle and knocked me down. And then so all of a sudden there's a scramble, and we go outside. And there's probably maybe 10 to 15 Cedar kids, and there's me and Eric and Bob. And we're it's kind of a standoff, and the kids are saying stuff, and the one kid from Summit named Dick Fife, he decides he's going to be the leader and come over and get the fight going again. And he comes over and he starts barking at Eric, and Eric hit him, and when he hit him, it flipped him upside down, and his wallet hit me in the chest, come out of his back pocket. And he hit on top of a 49 Ford and slid clear on the other side, and the fight was over.
I feel like
it was done.
This is like Tall Tales, like Pecos Bill, and
it's true.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure he had a blue ox named Babe, and
no, but he could ride one.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a true story. I'll never forget it. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. But his wallet actually came out of his back pocket and hit me in the chest as he flipped over.
Oh
so
gosh.
Anyway. Yeah, I lost a promotion on that one.
Did you?
Yeah, because I was still in my fatigues.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was still in my fatigues. Yeah. So they didn't like that. I was going to be an E7, and they didn't give me the E7.
And you were in the 222, right?
Right, which was the 213th, which fought in Korea. The big long story about them and the Stripling Warriors, because it's kind of the same story as the Book of Mormon Stripling Warriors. They were surrounded by the Chinese communists, and they were able to go up a canyon and elude them, and then they caught up with them, and then in hand-to-hand combat during the night, they killed, I think it was like 280, and a bunch of them surrendered, and the Chinese army just went in chaos because they were so confused. And this was an artillery battery, which doesn't do hand-to-hand combat. They stay behind the lines and do fire direction. And what happened is that the opposing, or the army that they were working with, would be the Koreans, had neglected to tell them that they were retreating. Well, they retreated, and then the communists almost surrounded, except in one spot. And so, of course, Frank Daly was the colonel at that time, and he prayed and had the boys all pray to what to do. Well, they were told what to do, and he got up and he says, "This is what we're going to do." And he said, the men responded with exactness, just like the Stripling Warriors. And they went up 15 miles up this canyon, really hard canyon, and they made a standoff there. And then they came, and then they had the big hand-to-hand combat and actually won. And there was some minor injuries, and that was it with the men from Parowan, Cedar City, Richfield, St. George, and whatever.
Yeah.
So it was like 260 men against hundreds of Chinese. So
yeah, and the 222 still is around.
yes,
I've had some friends, but it's the Army National Guard.
Army National Guard.
Yeah, and it's the you just said their specialty is
Artillery. Yeah, and they shoot the big howitzers. Howitzer. Yeah, they're big. I had a chance when I was in the Guard to go out on the OP. It's outpost.
Yeah.
And on the outpost, they say raise it this much or whatever, move it, and when the shells come over, you can hear them coming. It's really kind of neat. You can hear them coming over your head, and you can watch them hit. And then on the OP, they show them how to adjust and they call it fire for effect and everything, and it was pretty neat to do that.
And so since you brought that up, you were in Fort Ord, right?
Yes.
Grandpa was too, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's where he got his basic training. That's where I got my basic training.
And I think Fort Ord's gone now.
Yes, the government sold it. It's homes now, I hear.
Yeah. So yeah, and then so what did you do? What were your responsibilities when you joined?
When I joined, I first went to basic training, and after basic training, I went to cook school because I wanted to be a cook. So I went to cook school, and I had the highest score out of my group that went through, and so they put me in a NCO mess. And in the NCO mess, it was really quite good duty because all we had to do was fix coffee, pies, donuts, cakes, and things like that for guys to come in and do a break. And we'd have one meal a day for about 30 people, but we'd go to the regular mess hall to get the main menu. And we get the main menu and just to make all this extra stuff that the other mess halls didn't have. And so I only had to do one meal a day, and I didn't do the 24 on, 24 off. I just was on every day, but it was only like about 8 hours. And it was really a great job, and the mess sergeant just thought I could walk on water, and we just really got along really good, and he took really good care of me. And after that, I got transferred to a regular mess hall, which I wished I never would have happened, but I went and down to reception station, which is the worst place to work, and I think it's just part of my training. But I get there, and the two guys that I'm working with are terrible. They outrank me, and plus they come drinking every day. And it was just really kind of really hard to put up with them. And I was doing probably twice as much work as the two of them were to feed 500 men twice a day, because we'd feed morning and noon, and then the new group would come in and cook. And then they'd do night and morning, then you'd come in and do noon and supper. And it just kept rotating like that. But the two guys that I got stuck with were terrible, and I didn't get along with them at all. And when the chart and the guy who was in charge, or the sergeant who was in charge of all the mess halls and the reception station came and did an inspection, he took the sergeant who was in charge of our mess hall in the back room and was talking. But I could hear him talking, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "that Clark's not doing any work. He's just so hard to work with, and we're just having to cover for him all the time." And that's just how it operates sometimes. Well, that guy left, and I was cutting up cabbage for the next meal. And he came out, and as soon as he came out and the sergeant was gone, I started throwing heads of cabbage at him. And I never did hit him, but I had him dodging all over the place. And the other guy said, "Hey, I'm going next door and get a cup of coffee. I'll be back in just a while." And luckily, he didn't report me or anything, but we got something straight. And I told him, I said, "Don't you ever do that to me again." And after that, we had a lot better working relationship, but he still was a terrible cook and a terrible worker. So anyway.
Oh, that's funny.
Were you married when you were in the service or in like training? And
No.
all that? Oh, okay.
No,
This is before.
no. Yeah.
You were, well, when you had to do, I mean, you were married though, you still had to do a weekend of.
Yes, I had to do 2 weekends, or I mean a weekend every month.
Yeah.
And then during the summer, we had to do 2 weeks at Camp Williams, and sometimes we'd go to Dugway, wherever we had to go shoot the guns. We had to cook on the go, and we'd get in a ton truck, and we'd have our stoves and everything in there, and we'd cook and prepare a meal on the move. And then when we get there, we'd set up camp, and then we'd feed the men as soon as we got there. So,
Yeah. Interesting. What?
Nothing.
No.
Going well. I'm like ready to skip ahead. I just love hearing like stories. Like I love hearing the story about how you met Marcia, but I don't know if we're ready to skip ahead to there. I don't know.
Talk about whatever.
I love that story. If you want to
you
share
know,
that.
I do too, because it changed my entire life.
I know it is
Yeah,
such
it
a
is.
good like. I don't know.
I can tell that story. I've told it quite a few times to different people, but I was home, and Mac had his little green 49 Chevy, and he had it all fixed up and everything. And he went to Beaver to the races on the 23rd of July, because they have them almost every year in Beaver, and it's a fun time. And Mac wanted to be me because I was 22 years old, and so he could be me and buy beer or whatever he wanted to do. And so he introduced himself as me with my name. And during that day, he runs into Marcia, who ends up being my wife. And this is how it happened. He set up a date with her for the next evening, and so she thought he was me because he'd used my name. She had seen me before in the college dances and stuff when her boyfriends and stuff would take her over to the college dances, and she was 17 at this time, and so she thought she had a date with me the next day. Well, Matt came back that night, and the next morning I talked to him and I said, "Hey, look, how were the races?" He says, "They were really good." And I said, "Well, I'd like to go. Can I borrow your car?" And he says, "Sure." And I says, "Remember, you borrowed my hat and my boots. I need them back, my cowboy hat," because I was kind of a cowboy back then. And so he gave me my hat and I got my boots back and everything, and I put them on. I dressed up in my cowboy shirt and my belt buckle and all that kind of stuff, and get in his car and head to Beaver. So I go to Beaver, and I'm standing there talking to David Robinson, who is one of my good friends and kid I competed against in high school in basketball. We were talking, and she came up to me and said, "Hey, what time are you going to pick me up tonight?" And I'm no dummy. I didn't say, "Who are you?" She was a beautiful girl. She asked me what time I was going to pick her up. I said, "Well, what time would you like me to pick you up?" And she said, "How about 8 o'clock?" I said, "I'll be there." And so she walked off, and I turned to David and I said, "Who is that girl? She's hot on me. I'm ready." And he said, "That's Marcia George." And I said, "Well, where does she live?" And so he told me where she lived. And so I went and picked her up at 8 o'clock at night, that night, just like I was supposed to. And we went to the dance, and the dance is up the canyon, and it was actually called Kenyon Grove back then. And so it was my place, really. And so we went up and went to the dance, and we had a blast. And I never told her anything about Mac or anything like that, and she didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I think I got her home about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I went down and I stayed with Cullen Puffer in his house. And I said, "I'll come back and pick you up in the morning. We'll go have a cup of coffee or something, or a shake or whatever." And so I went back and picked her up the next morning. And we spent all day together, and I think I got her back late that night. And I went down and stayed at Cullen's again. And so we went a third day. And so we were together for basically 3 straight days. And then I finally went home. But we got to know each other pretty well, and we just had a lot of fun. And so it just really started a really neat romance. And then after that, it just blossomed into where we decided to get married. And her mother didn't want her to get married, so she flew up from California because, she'd actually moved to California because her stepfather had moved there for work. And so she came to Beaver just for a little while, and she was going to stay there for just a while. And then we met. She called her mother and told her we were going to get married, and she says, "No, you're not." So she got back to Beaver, and we had a talk and said, "We're getting married, so sorry, you can fight us if you want, but we can just wait till Marcia's 18 and then get married." And so she didn't really give in, but she didn't say no, she didn't say yes. But we just went ahead and planned a wedding and got married. So
yeah. Well, so that was July you met her, and you got married in December.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. July 24th, and then we got married the 29th of December.
Yeah.
And I always tell people we got married then so that I only could collect back taxes on that for the year.
Did you ever thank Mac for like meeting her? And I mean,
I didn't really just say thanks. I told him one time, I remember I said, we were riding around, and I said, I think I'm in love, Mac. And because of you, I guess I'm in love with the girl from Beaver. And,
yeah.
And it was kind of whirlwind thing, but it's still just the same way it was, and it's 57 years later. It'll be 57 in December.
Yeah.
57 years later, so it worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
I love that story.
Yeah, we'll have to get Mom in here to tell her
version.
Her side of it. I'm sure it'll be different.
Yeah.
Yeah. She would always tell a different story. Same thing at the races, but I can't remember what I have to think about it for a minute, but she always had a little.
Well, apparently she'd had her eye on me for quite a long time, because when she was 14, I don't recall who I was with, but we were in Beaver, and we were just horsing around and with some of the Beaver kids and stuff. And she was with her, what do they call it? With her leaders in, I can't remember what the program was, but she was with her older leaders who were about my age, girls. And she was in the back seat with a couple of the younger girls, and the 3 of the older girls were in the front. And so they pulled off the side of the road, and I went over and I said, "Which one of you gals want to go with me tonight?" And I'd ask one, and she said, "Well, I can't." And I ask another one, "I can't." Ask another one, and of course I didn't ask the girls in the back because they were only like 14.
Yeah.
She was one of them. I guess that's the first time she ever saw me. And anyway, we just kidded around for a little while and were talking through the window of the car and everything. And they said, "No, we've got to get these girls back." And anyway, so after that, she saw me a few times at the college dances and stuff. And I had no idea who she was.
Did she say she was was she a cheerleader?
Yeah, she was a cheerleader, and then she was what they call a B step, and the B steps marched, and then she was a cheerleader too and she still loves football. She likes football better than she does me.
Yeah.
I mean, and she knows a lot about football, and she gets so disgusted when they do stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you got to be kidding me. She knows more about some of the players, what the players should be doing than they do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, growing up in Beaver, it's quite a football. It still is today.
Oh yeah, even today it is. Yeah.
And that's Kanab. I mean, we had Colton in here, and he was telling everybody we got to get over to Beaver for the football game. That was the opening game. It was a good game, but Beaver came out on top again. So.
Well, it seems like too, like basketball maybe was more popular
back then.
Like you were saying, everyone would come to basketball, or maybe it is still.
It was all basically all football and basketball both. Mm-hmm. The issue Parowan we had in football is we didn't have enough kids to play football to be very good. Mm-hmm. We actually had to, when we do a scrimmage, we'd have to do the right side of the offense against the left side of the defense, and we could only go one way because we couldn't field two full teams.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And so we had to practice that way all the time. And we were okay in football, but we only won maybe a couple of games during the year because Beaver beat us. Cedar killed us all the time because they were so big. Dixie, so you had to play Dixie. Mm-hmm. You had to play Hurricane. Kanab, it was back and forth. I know the toughest kid I ever played against in football was from Kanab.
You remember his name?
He was. I don't remember his name, but he was the strongest kid I played against in football. Any one of the years that I played, other than the fullback from Dixie when I was a sophomore. That what's his name? George Andrus. He was ended up being a professional bull rider. Huh. He was a good athlete. And Arlen Hafen was one of the running backs. His brother Richard Hafen. See, Arlen coached here for years. I don't know whether you knew that. He was the football and coach here for years. Arlen. He lives here in St. George. Kanab. And Elder Holland was in the backfield too. And they won that my sophomore year, and that's the first play I ever got was I was covering the left side, and they run that Andrus kid at me, and I hit him, and I saw sparks when he hit me, and he tripped over me, and everybody thought I'd made a great tackle. He came up was congratulating me, and I thought, great tackle. I just got
knocked out,
got killed. Anyway, they took football. They beat us in basketball for state, beat Parowan. Tennis, track, and baseball in 1958. So, yeah.
Was Panguitch?
Panguitch won in 57, I think it was. They beat Bingham in 57.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with Joe Worthen. Joe Worthen was a great athlete, and he drove the baseline and made a winning basket right about 2 seconds to go and beat Bingham.
Wow.
And Bingham went A after that. Cypress and Bingham both went A after that.
And back then it was only A
and B.
And B.
A and B.
And now there's six?
Six. All right, there's six.
6A, 5A,
Right.
4A. I think.
Wow.
Is Kanab 2A then in Parowan?
Yeah, Kanab's 2A. Parowan's 2A.
Beaver 2A?
If we'd have been 2A, we wouldn't have lost a game for probably 8 straight years.
Yeah.
Parowan was so dominant in basketball, but not against American Fork. Who else? Juab beat us. But we went 20-4 my junior year and 20-4 my senior year. That includes the state tournament. So we were pretty good.
And you won a couple games. We were talking about this earlier, but so you played at BYU at what was the
George Albert Smith Field House.
Yeah, the field house. And how many did it seat?
Just over 5,000.
Yeah, and I think the Marriott Center is BYU's now.
Right.
And it's about 19,000, I think.
Yeah.
Somewhere
I think
in
that's
there.
right, yeah.
So that was a pretty big.
Well, it was big for, if you ever watch the show
Hoosiers?
Hoosiers, it's a lot like
That's when you played, huh?
Being in Parowan, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Same time period.
Yeah.
Everybody's wearing Chuck Taylors.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I actually bought a pair of, what were they? They were some other brand. And I played in them 1 or 2 games, and I couldn't stand them. I threw them away. I don't know what I did with them, honestly, but they just weren't Chuck Taylors.
Yeah, which is funny now.
And it was all high tops too, because I never saw a low Chuck Taylor until I was at junior college. And one of my friends on the team, Dennis Belliston, had a pair of them, and he didn't dare wear them. And I said, "What size are they?" And he says, "They're 10 and a half." And I said, "Well, I'll wear them. I'm not afraid." 'Cause, I mean, nobody was wearing low Chuck Taylors back then. That was basically a tennis shoe. And I wore them, and I loved them. So anyway, yeah.
Was it your basketball team that played like a famous basketball team? Or was that your dad?
That was Grandpa. They played the
Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah.
Yeah. We actually played a team that was a throw-off of the Harlem Globetrotters, our faculty team. And they beat us by about 4, but they had to press really hard to play, but they had some good players. And I remember I went down, and I had a move that I used in high school where I could cut down, and then just before I got there, I'd flare out just a little bit and then just throw it and spin it off the board. And this big guy came up, and he could jump like crazy. And he jumped up and was going to block me, and I did a round spin, and what he said, "Did you see that kid blow and screw that off the board?" And I heard him say it to one of his buddies, because he was going to put that in the upper deck, and I just flipped around and I screwed that thing off the board. Anyway, it was fun. And then we also, when we were doing that, we played against a radio station and
the Jazz.
The Jazz station, and who was the coach? Help me out here. Frank Layden. I was the coach for the faculty team, so I got to coach against Frank Layden, and we'd get up and walk up and down the sidelines, and we were talking to each other, and I'd just tell him, "We're going to kick your butt, Frank, and got to play some defense." We were just having fun back and forth like that. It was just really a fun game.
Yeah, I was probably, I don't know.
Oh, we got to go eat pizza with them after, and you went with us, didn't you?
Yeah, and I got to sit by Frank Layden, and it was the first time I ever saw he used a fork and a knife to eat pizza.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen anybody do that.
Yeah.
I thought it was just odd, but anyway, he was so funny.
He's an amazing man. He professional basketball wouldn't have survived in Utah if he wouldn't have been the coach. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have happened, but he selected players that would come and live the standards close enough that Utah would accept them. And other than that, they never would have made it. He was an amazing guy.
Yeah, he was a real funny coach, but they didn't win a lot back then. But then as soon as Jerry Sloan took over, and they had Stockton and Malone. Of course, he probably he would have coached Stockton and Malone.
Dantley. He coached Adrian Dantley. He was his player, but he was only 6'5".
And Daryl Griffiths.
But AD had the best moves out of anybody back in those days. He could use all 6'5" and do a crossover step, and he did some things that were just absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
for a player back then.
I didn't think we'd be talking about the Jazz, but
yeah.
Of course, you coached high school basketball you played at Parowan, and then it's now SUU, but what was the school called back then?
It was called CSU. It just went from BAC to CSU when I got there, and it was College of Southern Utah, and it was a junior college, and I played there for 2 years, and then they went to a 4-year school. And when the new coach came in, he just had a selective tryout, and I wasn't asked to try out. He told me not to try out.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
I didn't know that. Yeah. Grandma played or went to BAC, which is Branch Agricultural College.
It was a branch of the school in Logan back then. That's why it was called a Branch Agricultural College. Yeah.
Oh,
and she played girls basketball 1 year there. And
so that would have been about. She was born in
1917.
or 17.
1917.
So
So she would have been about, say 20. It would have been,
1937.
28, 29. Or I mean,
37, 38 right there.
Right. Yeah. And back then they had 3-on-3 on both ends of the court. If you were a defensive player, you stayed on the defensive end.
Really?
Against the other team who had their 3 offensive players. When you got the ball, you threw it to your offensive players who played against their defensive players. And girls basketball, yes, that's how it was played. Yeah.
That's interesting. What year was Naismith invented it with the peach basket?
Naismith.
Yeah,
That's his last name, Naismith.
James Naismith.
Right.
I'm just trying to think how, when Grandpa was playing, I mean, because the story of the Globetrotters, I think it was 1930 or 32, so he'd have been 18 or 20. The Globetrotters were driving through Utah.
Right.
And they broke down in Parowan. And
they needed money.
Well, yeah, and they found out the people in town, and word got around, and so they organized a game. And anyway, the Globetrotters typically have a team that's kind of a, they just are there to run around on the court and,
make trick baskets. And
they're just, the team is just the Washington Generals, I think they call them, and they're just kind of a dummy team.
Right.
Well, the Parowan was playing them for real, but I think the Globetrotters, they beat them in overtime. And anyway, that's in Grandpa's journal. But yeah, that would have been 1930 or 32. Anyway, I'm just thinking back, like basketball was only invented, maybe a decade or two before that.
Right.
It wouldn't have been very old.
No.
So it's just kind of interesting to think about back then.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty amazing for the Globetrotters to be in Parowan playing a group of, and they would have had that basketball team that you talked about with the 6'5", 6'4",
right,
all those taller players.
Yeah.
They actually could have challenged the Globetrotters back then. So
yeah.
Anyway,
another famous guy I remember too stayed at our motel. His name was Jack Dempsey.
Oh, yeah.
He was a heavyweight champion of the world, and he had a black Jaguar. And I went out and looked at it. I was really young. And his hubcaps were like moons. They used to call them moons, but it had Jack Dempsey printed across them.
Wow.
So it was pretty cool. Anyway, he stayed in room 6. I remember that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, it's been a lot of fun. We'll have to make this round 1. We'll have to get you back here, I think, for some more stories. Unless, did you have something you were thinking?
No, I was just gonna move on and be like, okay, what happens next? Like you don't stay in color country forever. You end up moving away from it,
Right.
And anyway, but we don't have to.
Yeah, and I can tell that story really quick too. After I graduated, there was 3 jobs open for a PE teacher and a basketball coach. And one of them was Altamont. The other one was
Bicknell.
Bicknell. Yeah, in
Wayne?
Bicknell it's
Wayne High?
Wayne High School.
Yeah.
And then Kearns High School. And when I was a senior in college, we did a tour with the soon-to-be graduates at Olympus High School and Kearns High School. And my high school coach was the head coach at Kearns. And so he introduced me to the principal while we were touring the facility, and told him then that he wanted me to be his coach, his sophomore coach, when I graduated. And so after I got graduated, I sent resumes to those 3, and I interviewed at Wayne, and then I interviewed at Altamont, and then I interviewed at Kearns. And when I interviewed at Kearns, it really, really went well, and there was a ton of people that applied for the job, but because my coach asked the principal to hire me, I got hired.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a cool situation. And I wanted to move to that area basically for the competition, because I wanted to coach at the highest level I could in high school, where it was more competitive because
Right.
of the size of the schools. And I wanted to do that. And I also wanted to coach with Coach Wood because he and I had a special relationship all the way through my playing and stuff, and I could tell some stories about that too. But maybe we could talk about those another time. But he was our football coach, our basketball coach, and our baseball coach. So I played all three of those sports for him, and we had a very close relationship. And we actually named our first son Brady after his son named Brady because of our relationship. So,
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you chose Kearns because I wouldn't have met
that's right.
Saunders. So
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
it's
Yeah.
just funny how
you
one
never,
little decision, I don't know.
you never know if you would have gone coached at Wayne. I might have been over at Fish Lake.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Or
Cashiram.
Casharum.
Yeah, our paths could have crossed still.
Yeah.
Yeah, never know.
We just
But-
need,
Anyway, it's been fun, and I got lots more stories, so we'll
Yeah.
have to continue.
Well, we'll
Okay.
have to write some of this stuff down, and anyway, I just thought it'd be fun to get a few stories down, and cover some of the things that you did growing up in this area, and what it was like for you growing up, and get to know about Grandpa and Grandma and your brothers, and anyway, it's been fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. I got a lot of stories we haven't told yet, and some I can't tell you.
Well, we'll record them.
Yeah.
And we just won't publish them.
There you go.
yeah.
Okay.
So, all right.